And I just sort of think like follow the thing you love, and then you'll find a way to make it work, and life will be more worthwhile and meaningful. So like following my passions of food, and then learning about solutions of sustainability, all of this stuff, like it doesn't feel like work. All of my life is aligned with the project that I believe in and the philosophy. So it's really like, it's just, every part of it is rewarding. And I'm like, you only have one life to live. You might as well figure out a way to make it like, this way.
This is the Regenerative Real Estate Podcast. Revitalizing the world together. Welcome to the Regenerative Real Estate Podcast. This is your host, Neil Collins. It is a show that is supported by our work at Latitude Realty. In it, we explore our natural and built environments and how they can be used as a force for good. The show sets out to inspire impactful ideas, meaningful change, human wellness, and ecological restoration through interviews and easy-to-digest conversations. Our guests range from industry leaders to iconoclasts, from both well-known figures to everyday people leading extraordinary lives. This is a show for people looking for education and inspiration on how real estate can be done differently. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Regenerative Real Estate Podcast. I'm really excited to today's conversation. I've been looking forward to this for quite some time since I've read about Ashley Colby's story. Ashley, you are in Uruguay, and I'm so pleased that we were able to make this work. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah. So just for the listeners out there, Ashley and I were just talking about this before we hit record. We are a long way away. Ashley is in another country. So if there is any technical difficulty with the recording, we're sorry, but this is just the kind of the state of the affairs that we're in. And it is a pleasure that we do have the technological capability to connect. So Ashley, I'm just really curious. I really don't know much about your background, but what I do know is fascinating how you ended up in Uruguay and what you were doing. Can we really start at the beginning? And I would love to get into your background.
Sure. So I'm from Chicago. I'm from the south side of Chicago, and working class family. My dad's a fireman for the city of Chicago, and we never really traveled much. I definitely didn't travel internationally besides a Disney cruise I went on as a kid from like Florida to the Bahamas. So I really didn't have a sense of the outside world. I mean, our small little neighborhood in Chicago was kind of the extent of it, and I studied abroad in college and I went to Rome, and that was just such a transformative experience to understand like what else exists out there in the world. And then I got the travel bug after college and just basically worked as a nanny to save money to go on these long, like overland, very, very shoestring journeys. And I traveled to 35 plus countries in the period after college and before graduate school. And just was sort of searching out, like, I don't know, almost like this pilgrimage of what exists out there in the world. What can I learn? I got really interested in different food systems and seeing like different markets and the way people ate and the connection around food. So then I got my PhD, or started a PhD program at Washington State University in environmental sociology, focusing on food. And I started by, my dissertation project was talking to people who do, in Chicago. I went back to Chicago, my hometown, to do my research because I felt comfortable there. I knew the population. I wanted to talk to people who produced food for their own consumption. And I wanted to know, are there people who are really doing like a big amount of this in Chicago? And basically, in the midst of designing my project, I had a conversation with another grad student who asked me who I was going to be studying in Chicago. And I said, I'll talk to people in the city who are like big into food production, and he's like, why aren't you talking to rural people like outside Chicago? And I kind of had this bias, as somebody who's focused on environment, like these cool urban people who are like growing food in community gardens. And I guess I just really didn't have a really good understanding about rural livelihood. So I said, like, okay, fine, I'll include rural people as like a case study, as like a comparative case to the urban people. And that really set me on a totally different trajectory in life, because I think my whole vision of environmental solutions was sort of this, like, it was a little bit, I say in my research, environmentalists, people who take that identity, tend to be highly educated, elite, urban, liberal. And that's a kind of small bubble. It's a small microcosm. And the kinds of solutions that group comes up with it's going to be biased in some direction, because they're like a very specific subgroup. And so talking to these rural people and understanding their way of connecting with nature and ecologies through food production really helped me understand, almost like my international travel, this whole other social world that exists that's worth listening to. So then trying to think big picture, like how do I try to learn this in my life too? The short of this story is, in the middle of grad school, in one of my classes, we were having a conversation about, in an environmental sociology class, shout out to Dr. Scott Frickel, who is now at Brown. He and the class, and this really resonated with me, we're talking about how do we understand nature? How do we understand the world through the lens of, science and rationality, or through experience? And we read this story about these scientists who study salmon populations in the Pacific Northwest, which my dissertation and work in my PhD was in Washington State. So this is relevant to our ecosystem. And this one group of scientists was studying how salmon populations would be impacted by by different dams in the area. And they did this by putting out computer models, trying to imagine what might happen. And then another group of scientists just counted the salmon. And of course, the second group of scientists was much more accurate. And so then it got me onto this whole other path of thinking, how can I affect change in the biggest way possible? I think part of that is me as an individual had to and made the decision to get outside of academia to really live the experience of trying different sustainable or, environmental solutions, by actually doing those things, experiencing them, learning from those experiences. And it puts you out of the theoretical space. So all of that in mind, the travel, the experiences in grad school, the dissertation work, put me on this trajectory. Like, I've got to go, like, actually do it too, and continue doing research and teaching. And the international travel really told me, like, we got to find a place where we can learn a lot from people who already do this kind of stuff. And I would say there are plenty of places in the US you could do this as well, but there's other structural barriers there. But here in Uruguay, it's just so incredibly common to produce food for yourself, to just be, it's kind of a normal everyday thing to have chickens or a garden or even cows. Like, people who have houses in towns have cows like on their property, one or two. And so, learning from this whole environment around us, was really the goal. And, I can say more about what we are learning or have learned already and are in process of learning. But that was the idea, is go to some place that has this social infrastructure to really enact environmental solutions on like a very human scale. And Uruguay is that. And we've been here 4 years, and I haven't looked back. It's been wonderful.
Well, let me ask you, had you been to the country before you moved there?
Yes. So in the middle of grad school, we came in 2012, early on in my grad school process. Before that, before I had even started grad school, we had talked a little bit about like what if we lived somewhere internationally. My husband's is a Spanish teacher with his BA and MA in foreign language. So we always kind of had this thought like maybe we would go to a Spanish speaking country and raise our kids to be bilingual, that kind of thing. And we went to Costa Rica first, and there were some things that didn't seem great about Costa Rica for us, or just weren't a good fit for us. And yeah, so then we came to Uruguay as like a potential candidate in 2012. And we came on a work exchange. There's this program called WWOOF, which is WWOOF, stands for Worldwide Opportunities on Organic Farms. The idea behind it is you stay in some place for free in return for some labor. So it's kind of like a work travel exchange program. And we came to this area in that program, sort of just looking to check it out. We had looked up some things online in advance. And we bought property on that trip, which we had some money from our wedding to purchase some property. And then it was just like a scramble from 2012 to 2016 to figure out, like, finish up the graduate degrees, save some money to build a house on the property, had a kid, our oldest daughter in the meantime, like totally crazy time of life. And looking back, I can't even believe it happened now that I'm more settled. But yeah, so we did come here. We bought this piece of property that we're currently on back in 2012.
So let me get the framing of the story right. With a kid on the way, you're in graduate school, you bought a piece of property in a foreign country, no real job on the back end, no way to really know what you're doing, but you wanted to just test the waters of what does small scale sustainable living look like. That's a bold move.
Exactly. Yeah, but like I don't know, I'm very like Yoda. There is no try, only do. Like, you just got to figure it out. I honestly feel like we're in this crisis. We're in so many crises at once that it's very easy to do something wild and crazy. I think if we were in more stable periods of time, there would be this super strong social pressure. Like, you have to do things this way. You have to build your resume. You have to climb up a ladder. But I think more and more, like, though, that infrastructure is crumbling to the point that a lot of people, like, if you say, I didn't want to climb the corporate ladder, I didn't want to climb the academia ladder, they're like, oh, I get it. Like, those ladders are awful. And so it's not that hard of a sell to explain to people. So I always say, in general, part of the philosophy is crisis leads to opportunity. I mean, it just mixes everything up so that we get out of our normal patterns. And so I've also kind of always had, I guess after traveling, this idea that there's really no way you can go wrong following something you're passionate about. So when I was traveling around, I was just sort of like following my passions and interests, and then more things came of it. So I think a lot of people think like, oh, I'll get a job and then I'll sort of like force myself to become passionate about it. I don't know, almost kind of like an arranged marriage. Like, you'll figure it out. Like, you'll figure out how to become passionate and good at it. And I just sort of think like, follow the thing you love, and then you'll find a way to make it work, and life will be more worthwhile and meaningful. So like, following my passions of food, and then learning about solutions of sustainability, all of this stuff, like, it doesn't feel like work. All of my life is aligned with the project that I believe in and the philosophy. So it's really like, it's just, every part of it is rewarding. And I'm like, you only have one life to live. You might as well figure out a way to make it like, this way.
No, I think that's amazing. As someone that also stepped out of academia and that career path to then go into something in a very conventional real estate world and doing that, scaling companies and realizing, you know what, energetically, I am so misaligned right now, despite the fact that we're growing double and triple digits year over year, and we're making, we're a success on paper in the eyes of other people. people really forget that, hey, if you're not aligned with your skills, your passion, and what the world needs, then it's going to be a pretty long haul. And
Yeah, I
so
know. And
that's
it's hard to keep telling yourself that the messaging of just stick with it. Like maybe there's just like, I don't know, some sort of pension at the end of this or whatever. But then, I mean, then your whole life is gone, you know? So you spend your life like waiting for that, I don't know, this carrot at the end that, what's the point?
so I want to pick up the story again. You moved to Uruguay, you're there, you've got the property. How are you really tying in what you're doing in country, on site, with a relatively, I would imagine, just you've got tons of opportunities. It's just the two, well, maybe the three of you now. Uh, where did your work go from there? What did life look like, and how are you tying that in with the advocacy work that you're doing?
Yeah, so this is like, I would say, trial by fire of everything I advocate, which is um you just got to figure out a whole bunch of things at once, and you have to make it work, and it's you have to think you have to think of so many things at once. So we first get here like thinking through practicalities. There's no home on the land. There's just an old building. So we have to at this point we had two daughters. Now we have three. So we first moved, we have two daughters. One of them's 4 months old. The other one's 3. And we have to rent a place nearby our property on a short-term lease, and try to find a builder for some sort of home. So like trying to get a builder in a foreign country where you don't know like about building regulations, what would be the cheapest thing, what fits within our budget, what would be the fastest thing. In the meantime, building out the infrastructure of my idea when we first moved here, which is to use my PhD to host student groups to come and see on international study abroad trips, which fits right into the idea of experiential learning. So meanwhile, building the infrastructure of that school, which eventually became Risoma Field School, um, and it's not a school until it's a school, right? And so just having lots of conversations with people with different universities. Our first university who ended up coming was University of Idaho, about what it would be like. But again, like we have no previous relationship and have no previous experience, so just like trying to pitch them this idea. I'm an academic from Washington State. So I know how to work with undergraduates, but it's a risk they're taking. They don't know Uruguay. They don't know me. So all of those things, the details of that are to say, you kind of just have to, I'm a really strong believer in just figuring out the points in the world where you can use your agency to like push through, because in sociology we think a lot about social structures that limit people's ability to maneuver in the world, and usually the less power you have, it as a result of whatever socioeconomic status or any other like demographic characteristic, the less agency you have. And so trying to think through like where do I have agency in this world? Where can I leverage, like thinking in financial terms, but where can I, aprovechar is the word they use in Spanish. How can I take advantage of my skill set, my passions, to get these, I'll get the goals met that I want to reach? How can I make a living here doing things that I'm passionate about? How can we build a house? And then, with the eventual goal to produce food for ourselves, which just recently, like a week ago or 2 weeks ago, we got cattle, which is scary because we're, like I said at the beginning, we're just Southside Chicago. And so it's like sometimes when I think of myself and my background, just growing up like this 90s kid eating like Doritos and cereal and watching TV a bunch, like it's so funny to think about where I've come and where I have landed. But yeah, so anyways, the whole point is like navigating all those things is so crazy. It's extremely hard. I think a lot of people get this overwhelming sense of like, where do I start? The problems are so overwhelming. And to me, like you just started at the beginning, it was 10 years of traveling and studying to get me to even think about where I would want to start and actually like, put some roots down and what I would like to do. So, I would say, a lot of people, my advice, although now it's unsolicited advice, but at this point, is to just get people to try to get out of the theoretical space, be kind with themselves in terms of thinking about what kind of future they're trying to make, because it's so overwhelming, the problems that face us, and trying to reimagine everything anew and keep all those things in your head at once is just like, it's crazy overwhelming. So, it's hard. It's not easy. But I have found on the back end of things, now that things have calmed down quite a bit, and we've been doing this, you've been here, actually moved 4 years, over 4 years, that it sounds so cheesy, but I'm so much more resilient, because I have gone through difficulties, because I've had to like fight and figure out. I mean, when we first moved into the house, we were waiting for the power company to turn on the power to the property, which they just needed to connect like one little line, but it's a government bureaucracy, and like it was 6 weeks or something where we had moved into the house and had no power or water, because the water is run off of a well pump. So we're like camping in this house for 6 weeks with 2 little kids. And I don't know, looking back, like during the time I was like, just kind of head down, get through it, just whatever you got to do, take care of these kids, like make sure everybody's clean and fed, and like just survive. But looking back, I feel fond of that time, because of like what we learned. And now when the power goes out, it's not a big deal. It's not a big deal at all. We have like a total infrastructure to deal with it. We have a generator if we need it. We can just like live without power if we need it. And that I feel like is a really important skill that's hard won. But if you do have it, and I'm not saying I'm like the toughest person on the planet. I still like hate camping, but I think if you can get it, you're just going to be better off in facing these crises. So the good side of thinking about hardship is like what can come out of it, and your ability to tolerate things can really just strengthen you as a person, I would say. And I would argue, like historically, sociologically, it's going to be an important skill for the coming decades.
Yeah, resilience is huge. It's something that you only build by experience, and your story resonates such on a deep level with me. After college, I went into a country called Moldova in Eastern Europe with the Peace Corps. And it was there where you're spending 2.5 years under the guise of like, let me go help. And I do think that developmental approach is completely backwards, because what I think the
Totally.
overwhelming majority of people that have those international experiences come to realize is that they've received more benefit in terms of just experiencing what it is like. And this was in a place where it's very agrarian, very small scale, local producers. They have the cow, they've got their vineyards, they've got a garden. They're putting up food in the winter, in the summer for the winter. They have this abundance of resilience in their food system. They might not have a lot of money, and they will talk about that, because now they're getting compared to the West and wanting to join Europe and all this. But at the end of the day, they do have a full cellar, and they do really have community bonds over breaking bread and sharing the food that came out of their garden. And what it is so stark with our work here in the United States is that we do try to connect real estate with land use and talk about resiliency through things like, how are you using your yard? Are you monocropping it with grass, or are you actually seeing it as soil and as an opportunity to ground yourself and grow either native species or an edible landscape? And we've gotten pushback that people say, only the rich garden. I'm like, that doesn't fit in with my worldview of traveling to dozens of countries and saying, it's kind of the opposite way. Now, there is a whole question about equity and access to land in the United States. And I do very much appreciate that conversation. And I know you can come in from Chicago. Uh, but at the end of the day, I do think that we are living in a very unresilient manner the more quote unquote developed we are, and we don't know where to turn. We have no idea where to go. And so I think it's so amazing that you took the step, you took a huge step into the unknown to say, let me do this. I'm curious, Ashley, and where I want to go with it is to really hit on the Rhizoma Field School and what the programming of that looks like, and where you really hope to go with it.
Yeah. So yeah, Rhizoma obviously is on hiatus during COVID times, but I have several relationships with universities where they're hoping to start programming up again at some point whenever it's safe to do so. But the pedagogy, the approach to teaching is ostensibly go to the places where local Uruguayan agroecological farmers work. Sometimes it's, within their home or nearby their home, or sometimes it's a separate field. So we go to these places. And when I say farmers, I mean, these are just like my friends. This is my actual community here. Go to those places, do volunteer work with them, and then talk to them before and after. And the actual volunteer work is super key because for a couple of reasons. One, it's really important for the farmers, the Uruguayans, to identify projects that they want help with and not the other way around. Like what you were saying, the development programs, it's like, we're going to come in with our ideas about what you need and you're going to like deal with it and you're going to work on these things that are our ideas. It's completely the other way around. The people here, they say like, come weed our field or come plant fruit trees or whatever it is. And then secondly, it's really important for the students to actually experience the work, like the work that these people do and what that feels like. Because there's insights you get from physically doing something that you just cannot get from describing what that's like to a student. I mean, and that's the whole idea behind in-person experiential learning, is that it's all encompassing. And so when we first started with a student group from University of Idaho in 2018, the goal was to show them how these local farmers do things and why, and have them have this cultural exchange as to what their thinking is behind things. And then when they come back to the place where they're staying, the students, I go with them and have a talk with them, like trying to explain it in a way that undergrads can understand using my background in sociology and teaching. But what was really interesting is that the goal from my perspective as designing the program was to get them to see the environmental benefits. But what has happened over the past few years is that the students not only see the environmental benefits, they also see the way that those environmental benefits and livelihoods only work if they are couched in a social fabric. And so it's really, really cool to see these insights from these undergrads because they help me to see things in Uruguay that I didn't even really see without their explicit like acknowledgement of it. So we'll have these conversations and they're like, yeah, it's so cool how like when we're on the property, they're like aunts and uncles drop by, or, the brothers and sisters of the people working it drop by, and the kids are involved in the farm work, but not in this like child labor way, because it's not like this corporate agribusiness where you have to like pick everything on some sort of timeline and you're paid per pick or whatever. It's for your own livelihood. So the kids are running around, they're a part of life. The aunts and uncles stop by, they're involved, they're all sharing things, they're sharing tools, they're exchanging goods. Friends stop by. We had one student group who helped build this shed out of basically some posts, which were trees that were felled from like the land, and then some bamboo sort of like lattice work, Then stuffed inside the lattice work with bamboo on either side was straw and mud. And so they built this basically, it's called like a bioconstruction earth building shed. And they had a couple of friends come by, the farmers we were working with, come and help with this. And they said, oh yeah, I had helped them, install a culvert pipe or something like that. So they owed me one. And, they see that these methods of exchange and building are completely integral to how the whole system can work. And so for me, I want to continue doing this work with Rhizoma once it's available. I'm going to keep writing on these topics. But the other thing that I don't know if I had mentioned to you yet is that taking these insights, I had this aha moment recently, that I can only write so many reports, but I'm getting really, really sick of the reports because they all say the same thing. There's all these reports, the IPCC report, all these environmental reports that are we need to foment sustainable consumption. And I keep thinking about how what you're describing in Eastern Europe is, I'm actually writing a paper now. I'm contradicting myself, writing a paper with a researcher in Eastern Europe who found the exact same thing. Subsistence food producers, incredibly wealthy and resilient communities in having their needs met. But then there's these development coming from the West telling them you're poor, you need to get into industrial ag, you need to get off the land, and this kind of thing.
Hey everybody, this is Neil. We are going to get back to this great conversation in just 1 second. But I think it's fair to say that right now we are facing some pretty unprecedented challenges in the 21st century. I mean, you name it, environmentally, socially, economically, we've got some big problems that we need to overcome. And that's why, for me personally, and the people that work with us at Latitude, we want to dedicate our time and our energy so that we are not only working to put food on the table and a roof over our heads, but also make the world a better place. And so if you are at all interested in combining your sustainability values with a very powerful financial model of real estate, then I highly encourage you to check out what we are doing at Latitude. We are creating something truly special with a tribe of change agents that for now is working across North America. And hopefully one day in the future, with you coming on board, we can be working across the globe. So please check us out. You can go to www.chooselatitude.com, or you can find us on social media at latitude.realty on Instagram, and we are also on Facebook. Okay, let's get back into it.
There are these kinds of systems in the poor parts of the world, quote unquote, that we need to find some way to mimic in the United States and in Western Europe, especially in cities. So I had this aha moment, how do I get this to happen? And so now I'm kind of focused on this idea, which is I think that we can build onto some kind of website a ability for people to connect with one another over things that they produce, whether it's not just food, but it could be jewelry or candles or home goods or whatever, goods and services locally, where they can sort of buy and sell through this platform. It would be an e-commerce platform. But it's totally based on my understanding about how these networks in Uruguay work informally. And because we've sort of lost those informal connections in places like Chicago, to build those onto the platform, because, everybody likes local and sustainable consumption. And then to kind of get those connections to be off platform is the goal. So, sort of like a tech to solve the problem, because you got to use the right tool for the problem that presents itself, but maybe tech that eventually implodes, or maybe some people will continue using it because it's convenient, but that's the idea. So I'm all in on this idea while the field school is shut, seeing if I can get that developed. I'm working with a few different people who could potentially help me to develop that and roll it out. But yeah, I'm really excited about that prospect because I'm like these crises keep rolling out, and I cannot like write another report that nobody reads. You know what I mean? I just like, it's so futile to sit and do that. I just need to like focus on something that I feel like even if it didn't work, I'm going to use all the agency I can to at least try and see what happens. And that's like right in line with my philosophy anyways.
Let me pick up on something that you said and really riff on what you're talking about. But you said the students that were coming to Uruguay, that the environmental benefits had to be couched within the social fabric. And that is truly the dividing factor that I see whenever we dove into, hey, we want to focus on sustainability with our work. Now, sustainability in the built environment, at least, or even in land, is like, how do we do less bad? What does electrification look like? How do we grow more organic food? Things like that. But no one was really talking about the social fabric, the social side of this, except for a few key people that really helped push our mindset from sustainability into regeneration. And I think it really boils down to community. That you can, if you bring in the community aspect now and the kids, you're talking about education, long-term development, and something that I'll give a big shout out to a piece of literature that I found so instrumental was a book called Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer that talks about reciprocity. And those three things, education, development, and reciprocity, really grounds out that experience of the environmental benefits that you get by bringing everything together. And where you originally came from that urban farming experience and how to get people together in an urban area, what I am finding is that we might live very densely in cities, but that does not equate to living in community. That there is a deep absence of community. And why I will continue to support the urban movement as well as the rural movement is that any chance that we can bring people together to sink their hands into a project or into the soil or into lending a hand for your neighbor creates resiliency. And resilience in the face of a lot of the calamities that we're facing is truly beautiful. And so that's why I just love what you're doing. And I think that it hits on so many different levels. If we can talk about how you made a leap into the unknown to, hey, this is truly how we're going to make it from informing academia to informing policy. So I love taking a story that blends somebody's experience and their passions so nicely together, where it's not just like, I got a job at the World Bank and then, I just like I'm writing these reports and I've got my doctorate and I'm just going to climb that ladder and that's how I'm going to enact change. Like, yeah, you might consider yourself a change agent and you might be doing good work, but like when you're coming up with solutions from the bottom up, wow, incredible. And it may not feel like you're making progress, but I can tell you that, you're like, this is unsolicited advice. No, this is solicited advice. I am coming to you and soliciting your perspective.
I love that. I thought of something while you were speaking that I want to touch on, which is one of the main findings of my dissertation work when I was talking to people in Chicago was that the communities of practice. So people who I always use the example because it's easy for people to understand, the chicken keeper community in Chicago. Communities of practice are where it's at. They are in my mind, the hope for the future. And so basically the way a community of practice comes about is they see some problem. And for some people it was, I don't trust eggs from the grocery store. I don't trust labeling. I don't trust the government. I don't trust corporations, whatever it is, some sense of risk. And this risk, I argue as a sociologist, is a perception, like a lived experience perception of normal people of the failure of the system in some way or another to make them feel cared for or safe. It's a failure of the infrastructure. So so they try to meet find a solution to that problem, and their solution is I like forget it. I'm getting chickens. I'm getting chickens, and I'm gonna at least have eggs. So this is what they've come to. For some of the rural people, they always have had chickens. A lot of the urban people was relatively new thing. But then what happens is, you need to source your feed somewhere. You've got to find a coop. You've got to deal with pests or disease or whatever. And so you can only do so much with books. And then you start reaching out to other people. And it's something as mundane as there's only like 1 or 2 supply shops in and around the city of Chicago where you can get chicken feed. So this is where these people go to like buy chicken feed physically. And then there's just like people there who know what they're doing, and also like little flyers posted of other, that we're part of this chicken community, or I'm like a chicken expert because this thing is sort of like grown and there's enough infrastructure around it. They say like, I just started getting chickens, and they start just having a conversation. Can I get your number so that I can like troubleshoot with you? And to me, like, God, something as mundane as that, the way that I perceive it as a sociologist is I see the political divide. I see the way that people approach social movements through ideological lenses. So you can only be a part of this social movement if you agree that neoliberal capitalism is blah, blah, whatever. You got to agree with all my ideas and the terminology I use. And we all have to like agree that the terminology is defined in a particular way, whatever. There is absolutely no way forward as far as I'm concerned in these ideological, ideologically focused imaginings about how the next system might be. What I argue as a sociologist in my book is that a lot of the people who are just like connecting with each other over chickens and like making friends, they're making a social movement and they're making social change in a way that's so incredibly profound because they're able to connect over this practice. So there's no barrier, there's no ideology, there's no like, well, prove to me that you think this before you can get into the club. It's just, normal human level stuff that we can connect over. And what happens is these people actually start softening each other ideologically by connecting with one another, which is obvious. It makes sense. Like if you have an ongoing relationship with people who are like different from you, and you actually know them, then you can be a little bit softer about these differences. And then you work on this shared project together. And then these things sort of, the other amazing thing that I found is that these things sort of explode into, for example, the chicken keepers will connect with a farmer out in a rural area who like they have more chicken manure than they know what to do with, and they connect with the farmer, and the farmer gives them like a box of CSA vegetables or whatever, and they're literally making these informal economies. And then there's so much resilience that comes out of that because you know that if all else fails, who has eggs and who has vegetables, and you're already friends with them. And so to me, it's incredibly powerful because once you get these people connected over something that's meaningful and in their own minds necessary for their own thriving, even something simple like necessary for their consumption, everybody needs to eat, then it's off to the races. People are incredibly innovative and they will work together. And that's what I found in my book when it comes to their mutual thriving. But you have to get them set up with things that are mutually beneficial to them. So the farmer wants the extra manure. The people want the box of vegetables. So you have to have these sort of like ongoing social negotiations, but you got to get people connected to make those things happen. So that's where the platform idea comes in, because like this is already happening. Obviously I found it in my book, but I'm sure it's quite marginal overall. And it's not,
What do you
the
mean by
percentage of the
marginal?
population who's, I would say the percentage of the population who's doing something like this in the United States is small, especially it's not just people who are doing some one or two things. Cause like I would say a lot of people are keeping gardens. But my sense is that it could be so much more than that. But people need to not only be given this story about what could be that's really hopeful, but also given the practical realities of it, make the practical realities of it possible. So I think that if we try to think about like what goods could be made in a local area, like in and around Chicago, for example, there are a lot of people unemployed now with this crisis. There's a lot of vacant land that's just shuttered. There's a lot of businesses that are shuttered. If I try to think about like what are the material resources in and around Chicago, you could make like you could either make, manufacture new, or reuse, or resell or upcycle clothes, raw materials, building materials, home goods, whatever, health and beauty, kids toys and kids clothing. Like you could probably meet a big percentage of your material needs locally if you got people both excited about consuming locally, making connections with others who do similar kind of things, and then getting people to imagine and the ability to sell something that they might make themselves or on a small scale or in a small business, make furniture, be a home repairman, be a appliance repair person, whatever, skilled labor, unskilled labor, all that kind of stuff. So when I say marginal, I mean, there are people who are super committed to keeping chickens, and they'll like go way out of their way to find other chicken people. But I think we've got to tip the scales to people who are not so hardcore, either on the production or consumption end. People who are not going to like do a bunch of research online for hours to find out like where do you get chicken feed or whatever, or how do you buy chickens. Like it's got to get more mainstream. There's got to be less friction. The idea has to be really easy and accessible.
Yeah, I do think it's coming. I mean, the chicken keepers is just one example, and this is an interesting caveat with our business. Whenever we're trying to figure out how to pivot from conventional real estate into more sustainable real estate, a branding expert asked us, "Who is our target audience?" I'm like, "Well, we've got to figure that out." And she wanted to charge a lot of money to go out and do market research, and I was like, we don't have that kind of money. And so we took the time over a multi-year experience to listen. And what we did find is that there are those chicken keepers, and they have their own little community, and people are gathering around that, and they are forming their own ecosystem. And then there's these like zero wasters that they're like, yeah, how do we do that? And then there's the gardeners and the permaculture people and the passive house people. And like these communities are truly exploding right now, finding
Totally.
their platforms, finding their voices, looking for ways, because I do think that we have had the catalytic experiences to realize that the system's not working in the way that we think it should. Like you can't just go to the grocery store and like, these are the eggs and I'm going to eat them and they're going to keep me healthy and all that. Like that, the social contract has been broken there. And I think if I'm just looking in, this is unsolicited, but because I do think that you have the ability to look at from the micro to the macro, you are starting to see things more ecologically. And from how does the economy work, and how does a community work, and what's the intersection of that? And so I do think that finding those platforms and finding the ways that you can get people together under the banner of whatever they're interested in. Like
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, because like the other thing I always tell the student groups when they come is like, it doesn't have to be food that you focus on. Like it could, we have to start from square one. I mean, in some sense, like reimagining education, reimagining what is a livelihood? How do you make a sustainable livelihood? How do you do sustainable consumption? What is a sustainable house? How do you do energy? How do you do transportation? Like, reorganizing all of these things, anything you're interested in, just go get into that. Like, education is one example. I don't have I want to say as a caveat that's very important to me. I don't think any one of these set of practices is a silver bullet, nor do I think that any one of these practices is 100% correct. What I do think is that the experimentation of the practices is key to figuring these things out. So I think the key message to all of this is that I want to foment more and more trial and error, not like, this is it, chickens, that's it, that solves everything. Like, no, the whole point is that it's trial and error. We're going to try this out. We're going to see what works, what doesn't work. We're going to connect people, whatever. But education is another example. My daughter goes to a school that's like a one-room schoolhouse here in Uruguay. And the ages are between 4 and 11. And there's 13 kids and a teacher and an assistant. And I just could not love that setup more. This last year, an initiative with myself and my husband, we bought some native fruit trees. And so they're learning about like native fruits and native plants, how to take care of trees. They're out in the garden. They have multi-age playgroups. What an amazing way to grow up. It's like a family. The school is like being in a family. They eat at school. They help cook. They help clean up after lunch. They all sit together. It's just so cool. And just thinking about the different possibilities for education, transportation, food, housing is another one. Like I did a study that is not yet published on this type of architecture called Earthship, which is super cool, a very interesting. It's not it's not the solution for every place in the world, but it's just a really cool trial and error form of architecture that we should all be kind of looking into, these alternatives that exist. So yeah, I could not agree with you more. Like, these ecosystems, individual ecosystems, are exploding. I would also just mention that one of the findings of my book was that if, for example, like the chicken keepers had this chicken coop tour to show their coops off to like other people in the city, in some ways to manage the negative ideas about what chickens are, but instead showing them that they're like kind of more or less quiet and not that dirty or whatever. But what ended up happening on that tour for a lot of people was that other people saw the chicken setups of other people who are chicken keepers. And then they also saw, for example, like bees. And they were like, oh, you keep bees? How do you do that? And then it got the gears turning. So there's like, when you start getting these people together, the cross-pollination and the innovation, I sound so Pollyanna, and I'm not. Like, I'm totally aware of the like structural barriers and the environmental and social and political problems that we're facing. But like, honestly, I'm an evangelist for this idea of these communities of practice, because I think people really do want to make meaning, they want to make connection, and they want to solve these problems. And it's really not rocket science. It's pretty simple livelihood strategies that can get people together working on these things. I'm super hopeful about that.
That is like the quote to end our quotes. I love it. Ashley, let's plug your book here to wrap things up, and where people can read all the reports you've written and the work that you're doing.
Yeah, so my book is called Subsistence Agriculture in the U.S., Connecting to Work, Nature, and Community. I want to plug my platform, which is not a platform yet. It's just a landing page for my idea, and it's now in development. It's called SULO Fair, which stands for Sustainable Local Fair, SULOFAIR.com. And then rhizomafieldSchool.com is the name of the field school, RIZOMA fieldSchool.com. You can find me in all those places.
Ashley, what an absolute pleasure. Great to connect. I love the work that you're doing. And I think that so many other people really need to hear this story. And that's what we're all about, is trying to turn up the volume on ordinary to extraordinary people doing amazing things and really making a difference, being a change agent. So thank you for taking the time to come on. Okay, everybody, that is a wrap. This is another just great episode that I'm so glad that you're able to tune in. And thank you for being interested in regenerative real estate. What we are trying to do is help people and planet thrive together by using the built environment as a catalyst. And so I've got a couple big asks for you. Number one is, can you please go to wherever you're listening to this podcast, leave us a rating and review. Those actually go so far. And since this is such a passion project for us, we really want to be able to attract the best thought leaders from around the world. Second is that if you really like the content that we're putting out, you can find us on our own Medium publication called Regenerative Real Estate. We also have a very active community on Facebook, which is called Regenerative Real Estate and Design, which you can request to be a part of, and we would love to have you. And third, this goes to what we do every single day, helping buyers and sellers demystify sustainability by working with people that want to either buy a property and are trying to figure out the financing of how do I actually live out my values? How do I put that water catchment system on there? Or how do I go finance a solar panel PV array? Or maybe I want to live closer to nature. And what are the properties that are out there that I can do that? And so we represent buyers like that. We also happen to represent sellers that maybe they've already invested in sustainable features. Maybe they have a living building or a LEED certified project. We want to help tell that story. So much of what goes on in the real estate industry is transactional thinking at best, and it translates down into agents just really don't know anything about sustainability. And for us, we think that the value is there, and we want to help highlight really the intrinsic value of it, not just the bedrooms and the baths and the square feet of what typical marketing goes on. So if you know of anybody that wants to buy or sell these kinds of properties that we're talking about, please reach out to us at Latitude, and be sure to subscribe for another great episode coming up next week.